Hello and welcome once again to episode 108 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So, daylight savings time happened, and
Yes.
I thought, I guess a few other Americans may have also thought that we were not doing this anymore. Like, I thought we had this big vote and everything, and it would not happen. And I was like, silly app that reminds me about daylight savings, that's not happening this year. And lo and behold, it happened. And I only know because my, fridge and rice cooker were, off by an hour, and I'm like, I guess the car, too. But yeah, that's still a thing. We're going to change one more time in next spring, and then next November we won't change, and then that will be the permanent time in the U.S. So it was off by a year. It seems like they made decisions for way in the year to I don't know, lily dally, and then change their minds maybe in between. Decide that the children were in danger after all, because that was a big part of the debate. So yeah, I'm not too sure what the final outcome will be, but according to the plan, we are not going to change time in November of next year. So this is like a public service announcement because I was duped by this false information I created for myself. So what this means for developers is good luck working with daylight savings time stuff, because I guess if you're on old versions of software like OSs and stuff, they may or may not know that the time is going to stop changing, or they may be updated out of band for stuff like this. I really don't know how that all gets coordinated. But yeah, I think time zones change all the time, so there must be an out of band way that most OSs get updates. But I imagine all your internet tech things, those will be completely clueless. So yeah, be prepared. Work well with time zones. They still exist in other parts of the world, and they still they will still shift by weird things 15 minutes sometimes, or a day other times. Calendars are weird. Use the APIs, and you'll be much happier for it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that every developer learns pretty early on is dealing with time and date just absolutely sucks, and it's so easy to get it wrong. There's a lot of nuance, and I can't remember why I had to look it up, but I was looking up the basically how leap year works, and it's more complex than just every fourth year. It's every 100 years,
except the centuries, and there's weird rules.
Yeah, it's way weird. I thought it was interesting to learn about, but I was like, oh, I'm glad there's an API that deals with this, because it only happens once every 100 out of 400 years or something. But there's a lot that goes up in the air with time, and it's just not fun. And so yeah, using things like calendar and all that are really nice, and I'm glad they exist, that someone did all the hard work for me and I can just kind of benefit off of it.
Yeah, leap seconds got really complicated too. They used to be semi-consistent until I forget the exact details of this, but something related to what we're doing to the planet has changed the the mass of the planet itself in the most smallest way necessary to cause the leap second stuff to get out of whack completely, and then we're going in the opposite direction to overcompensate what we were undercompensating. It's a
crazy.
whole mess. That we should have never understood time. That would have made things way easier for our dumb brains, and then noon would have just shifted over time, and we'd be none the wiser. We'd be like, why are they having lunch at noon? That's weird. That would have been our several hundred years down the line outlook on all this. But yeah, it's complete chaos. If you are an Apple developer, which I assume if you're listening to the show you might be, go check out nsdateformatter.com. It's one of the best resources that I have memorized anytime you need to deal with dates. not only does it have all the formatting options, which of course no one is ever going to remember. Don't use y. Don't use that one. Use the other one. It's also y, but there's capitalization involved, and
Yeah.
that's where it gets you. Financial calendars. Anyways, you do check out NSDate Formatter. They have a great tips section that basically says if you want to be dealing with dates internally for anything, like set a locale of US, I think it's US something, T or whatever. I'm doing a horrible job at like remembering off the tip of my head, so I'm going to look it up.
All right.
But there is a best practices section, and you can set the locale to ENUS POSIX, whatever way you pronounce that word. I've only read it. I've never said it out loud, I realize now. And that one's important because that will basically remove all the time zones and stuff from the equation, and you will end up with a very generic representation. Actually, time zones are included in that still, but you will not end up in situations where like the month gets flipped, or you have a different number of months than you were expecting, and weird stuff like that due to different calendars that the user might have set. So this is an override for all the locale stuff that the user does, and then you store your dates in a agnostic way. It's kind of like doing the big endian, little endian conversions that you might need to do when saving to a file, which people probably stopped doing ever since every computer basically operates little endian. But the network does big endian, so it's something that you need to think about still, at least to a minor degree. And yeah, dates are one of those headaches.
Yeah. One more thing with the nsdateformatter.com, I really like it because, especially when I'm like, looking at some JSON and the timestamp in the JSON is just really formatted. I don't know what it is. What I would do previously is like pull it into a playground and initialize a date formatter and start messing around with the date format string and having to run it over and over again, where nsdateformatter.com just has a text box at the top. You paste in what the date is, or like the timestamp is, and then you can mess with the format string. It's a little bit quicker to deal with that. So I don't know if you can actually paste in the string. I don't know.
Yeah, you can. You have the formatter, and you can muck around with it. Okay. One last tip that you just reminded me of. If you find making playgrounds to be a hassle because it's like, find a place to save the file and all this, you can go to your terminal and just type Swift, and then you get a fully interactive like editor for just Swift, and you can do all sorts of fun stuff in there. You might need to import Foundation as like a line, just import Foundation, but then you have access to almost everything, and that's a great way to muck around and try out different things, both with the language and with the APIs. So if you want to do something really quick and you want you want it to be completely ephemeral and not saved at all, that's a great way of doing it.
Yeah. There was an app a while ago, like Xcode 7, Xcode 8 days, called Play Now, and it was an app, but all it would do is just make a playground for you, and it was super nice. I don't think it works anymore, though. But I've just been using I just have a playground called Scratchpad, and I just open that and delete whatever.
It's the same one over and over.
Yeah.
Select all, delete.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's funny, those habits that we end up in.
Yeah.
So it turns out that Apple may be making their chips in the US for the first time, which would reduce significantly their dependence on China for manufacturing. Although I think they do make their chips in Taiwan itself, right? But that's still like under like weirdness because of China. So I hope Taiwan can finally get like the piece that they deserve. But it turns out that this might be a good plan B, especially for starting to move a lot of the manufacturing process away from China and onto U.S. soil where Apple operates. So if the U.S. does bad things to Apple, like Apple is doomed anyways. So that's at least a fair place to have all your eggs in one basket as the world's economies change. And this is because Taiwan Semiconductor
TSMC.
SMC is building a second plant in Arizona where they will go ahead and be building much smaller chips. I think they said up down to 3 nanometer, which is where Apple's currently targeting a lot of their manufacturing. That doesn't mean that they have no use for like the 4 and 5 nanometer processes, which the current, so like there was already an investment to build one factory that can do those kinds of chips. Like they're still making those for home pods and stuff like that. They either have like a huge stockpile of them already made, or they're still like making them on demand. I guess that's something that we really don't know as outsiders. But yeah, I think it's exciting to see chip manufacturing come back to the U.S. I think traditionally it's almost always been in the U.S., right? Like via Intel. Like Intel would always manufacture here rather than subcontract out. And that's where it all comes from. So I think that's cool.
Yeah. Yep. Intel fabs their own chips, as far as I know, for the most part. I
Mm-hmm.
think they have asked TSMC to do some stuff, but yeah, it is pretty cool that they're bringing stuff to the U.S. They have not for chips specifically, but I think either for assembly or for other parts of iPhones or probably all Apple products. They have moved to India in the past, relatively recently. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're moving it to either Vietnam, maybe
Yep.
I can't remember. But they are. I think this is just kind of more of a continued push to move things out of China, which
Mm-hmm.
or China and Taiwan, which again makes sense given the global climate. So it is interesting. It mentions something about I can't remember exactly where it said, but it talks about how by the time chip fabs take a long time, like years to actually get going. This one in Arizona that's currently there barely is, I think, up, and I think it will be functional in like 2023 or 2024.
Mm-hmm.
But it said something like by the time that it's actually this new second place is actually functional, Apple may have like technically moved on from 3 nanometer and be looking at something like 2 or 1. But I think that they can upgrade fabs to new processes, so it wouldn't be like a complete waste or anything. And like Dimitri said, there would be older products that the HomePod Max or something be on the 3 nanometer process or whatever it is. So pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool though. I'm sure it won't be a cost reduction, but a still cool.
Yeah. I do wonder how easy it is for them to upgrade those fabs because the whole reason why like these buildings get built, it's essentially one giant machine that makes chips.
Hmm.
And it's not like you can think of it as individual components, sure, like there's a modular aspect to it, but like that building is the machine for all intents and purposes.
Yeah,
And it's very, very specialized for these different kinds of processes. It's not like there are some parts that are process agnostic, but then the majority of the parts are very dependent on that process to be successful.
yeah,
And are very like specialized machines that like sure you might be able to upgrade some of them, but you're basically taking the whole thing offline
yeah,
for a year to like replace out significant parts of it. It's not like a piecemeal like oh let's just do this one over here. Um, so yeah, they might just be doing this to increase overall capacity for making chips
sure.
to reduce the general load on the system, which has been horrendous ever since the U.S. automobile industry really threw a wrench in
Yeah.
everyone's plans.
Yep.
Thanks, U.S. automobile industry. You've been great to us. But yeah, like everything was in a steady state up until that happened, and there was no extra capacity, and that has essentially bumped everything off into oblivion for the foreseeable future. It seems like we're finally starting to make some headway
Yeah.
improving that, but I think it's really going to come via these new factories coming online and then taking and displacing the orders that would have been way into the future to get done. So I think that's overall good. It's not like we had more demands than we could make. We had exactly the right proportion. So it's good that we're finally getting a little bit of extra demand. It should put some leeway into the system. And it's good that things will be made more locally because it'll give people jobs and give move some of that professional knowledge around the world a little bit better. Like it would be probably good for Europe to be doing something similar.
Yeah.
And then one country wouldn't hold all the cards for everything, basically.
Yeah.
Which makes for a more stable world economy, in all honesty. Like we complain about how the EU is making silly mandates on Apple, but that's for the EU. And it's good that they're doing that there because then it allows the company to think a little bit outside of their comfort zone into something that, yeah, they can just be stubborn and do a bad job for EU citizens. But they can also maybe think, oh, maybe it's better if we do it this way, and then that can benefit everyone a little bit better.
Yeah. Before we move on the topic of just fabs being an entire machine, we'll link a cool video from Linus Tech Tips that he goes in, and it's like insane how well I mean optimized as far as like positioning and things, but then they've got like pallets of stuff like being transported on these rails in the ceiling and going to another part of
So
the
cool.
fab completely autonomously. It's like way cool. Not something you'd ever be able to see normally, which
Hmm.
is cool that they were able to do a video on. So we'll link that. It was
Almost
just like,
everything is like blurred out to give you an idea of like how
yeah,
how very proprietary this information is. Like Intel does not want other fab manufacturers seeing
no,
how they like make their chips. That's like a big no no in the industry. And I would assume the only way this knowledge usually hops between companies is when a person like jumps ship and leaves. So
yeah,
that's like the only way that this knowledge ends up being shared. So I think it's great that he was able to do this because it gives all of us a glimpse, and maybe like a whole bunch of people want to be part of that process going forward, and they like want to make chips, and they think that's really cool. Now they get a little bit of a better idea of what's involved with that.
heck yeah,
And yeah, never make chips at home. There's like super dangerous chemicals that will like eat through your skin into your bone and like liquefy everything. It's not a good time. So
yeah,
like that's not a habit. Like you want to use specialized machines that humans are very far away from. You don't want to be doing it the
yeah.
old fashioned way anymore. Although it is possible. Like it's something that we usually think of as like so alien in terms of like the amount of technology that you need to build the technology that you need to build the technology that you need to build the technology. Like there's so many steps of removal from this that like if that machine goes down, then we are like at a world level in big trouble. The same thing is with like those giant transformers that like power our infrastructures. Like those, if they
Mhm.
die all at once, we are done for a good few months, at the very least. As a little bit of electricity is like portioned out and fixed that way, we're never going to be back at where we were prior to all those transformers going down at once. So don't get any ideas, anyone. Um,
Yeah, that's scary.
that yeah, like that can happen with a solar flare. Like then we'd be done, which is just kind of insane. But like chip manufacturing is something that you can do in a garage just by like buying old university equipment very cheaply. And I'm going to need to find it, but there's someone who like as a teenager was really interested in this, and therefore they like started making their own chips, and they talked about the whole process doing the lithography. Like it's
That's
something
crazy, dude.
that's
Holy,
really approachable if you just know the right things. It's not like you need the equipment for it. You can make your own chips circa the 1980s 1990s. Like you're not
right.
very far behind. And like we still use chips like that today, to be super clear. Like it's not like that is totally old technology. It's everyday technology.
Yeah.
And that's possible. It's just involves like chemicals that have like I forget exactly which kind of fluoride acid it is, but you get a drop of this on your skin. It will seep through and like dissolve into your skin and attach to any calcium it finds and then liquefy it. So your bones in your
Oh,
finger, it will start to liquefy the bones here and here and here. And it's like that one drop is going to cause so much damage. So it's like, don't do it at home.
for real,
that's all,
don't
the
do it.
only that's the only
That's like
advice I can give.
That's like the biggest "do not try this at home" ever.
Yeah, it's from the safety of YouTube. Let someone try it at home, I guess.
Yes,
But then tell them
that's
like you should be doing this at home. That's super dangerous. But yeah, making chips I think is really cool. It's cool that it's going to be a little bit better, which means that it'll be possible for people to just buy chips instead of making their own chips. So, um,
yeah.
yeah, A plus is all around.
Hmm.
In other news, Affinity is launching a V2 of all their software. Spencer, you use their software, right? This is
I
actually
do.
the company is called Serif, and
Yes,
their suite is called Affinity.
yes. I use Affinity Photo for the most part. When I was in high school, and briefly in college, I used Photoshop. Um, I never really got super far into Illustrator. I also used whatever Adobe's version of InDesign. I used InDesign briefly. I was on the yearbook. It was a class. It wasn't a club. So I used a little bit of that, but mostly Photoshop. And right as I was getting out of high school was when Adobe switched over to their now infamous subscription model, and they were really like the first pioneers of the subscription model, at least in my eyes. So after that, I switched to Affinity Photo, and it was, for what I did, it did everything I needed. So I've been kind of on the Affinity bandwagon, at least for photo, for a long time. And recently I got Designer, and I've hardly used it, but they're kind of upgrading to their V2 of the app, and kind of their whole thing is you buy the app once, you get it on all of their platforms. I think it's Windows, Mac OS, and iOS. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
iPad OS, at least. I don't know if they have iPhone apps,
No.
but there's no subscription. That's kind of their whole thing, which is, I find, very, very refreshing in a world where we're dealing with more and more subscriptions, and we're just like back to paying the same amount that we did for TV that we used to with cable or satellite, because we have all of these streaming services or whatever. So their V2 thing is I don't know. I get where they're coming from. They need to make money. There's only so many people that will buy their app, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
tacking on all of there's a What's New page, and it's quite large, the amount of features that they've kind of packed into this V2. They're giving you a 30-day trial and having it kind of be universal, even between like Apple and Windows platforms, is pretty cool. So yeah, it's I think 40% off. Let me see. Right now, yeah,
Yes.
40% off right
So
now.
what they're doing is kind of interesting. So there's no upgrade pricing. There's the V1 suite,
Hmm.
which you could have bought individually, and then there's the V2 suite. It
Yeah,
seems
sorry.
like the individual pricing per app is not universal. So you get either a Mac and Windows license or an iPad license, and that's because the pricing is
Oh,
significantly different. It's either regularly $69.99 for the desktop license or $19.99 for the iPad license. So it is still significantly
oh, I see.
cheaper on iPad. And then everything has been further reduced as sort of like a launch promotion kind of thing. So I think desktop is at $41 and iPad is at $12. So this is
Gotcha.
individually for each app. So there's essentially six: Affinity Designer, Photo, and Publisher for either desktop and iPad, respectively. Um, and then what they have is that universal license, which gives you everything, which would regularly be $169.99, or is currently $99.99.
Yeah,
And you get absolutely all of their suite. But this is their V2 suite. So there's no upgrade pricing from V1 to V2. You can continue using V1 as long as you need. These are like
yeah,
new app records, quote unquote. And these ones give you like access to all the new features, and V1 is not getting updates anymore. So this is very much a mix, a hybrid of the classical, like, hey, you're gonna buy an app and then you might upgrade it over time, versus like the more modern, like you expect everything to still like work, or you might buy a suite of things. It
yeah.
reminds me of Adobe's like first foray into this kind of stuff. They did the Creative Suite. So all of a sudden,
Creative Suite,
you're
yeah.
buying a bundle of Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, or what were the other ones that I'm like forgetting? You had
They had
Flash,
like
DreamWork,
20 apps or something.
Dreamweaver,
I mean,
or whatever. Yeah, they had a bunch of
they had
apps
a
that they bought
ton.
over the
Yeah.
course of many years. Like I personally was using Illustrator since like version 2 days on like Mac OS 7 or System OS 7
Yeah.
is what it was called. So I wasn't doing anything practical back then. I was just mucking around as a kid. But that's like the tool that I got very used to. And I used Illustrator all the way up to like CS5 before Sketch started becoming a thing. And then I was like, well,
Mm.
this is a much better model for me who does not use this for its intended super expensive rate that it's going at. So I moved over to Sketch and have been using that since. And I think my favorite like consumer friendly model is still the Sketch model, which I
Yeah.
affectionately call the Sketch model. It's basically you buy the app, and you get a year of updates as a part of that. And then after that year, you're not going to get the updates anymore, but they're still going to be made. And therefore, if you want more, you can, at your discretion, buy another year. So you get everything in between, and then another year full of updates. And I think this is like the least scummy of all like systems, because then you get the benefits of like maintenance for long term, and then you also get the benefits of like not needing to continuously pay and continuously deplete your wallet if what you use this for is not something that's continuously bringing in revenue for yourself, right? If you're just doing it for creative uses, then like that might not be something that you can continuously pay for, which Adobe
Hmm.
kind of sequestered that entire market. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy Affinity is filling a very separate gap. Like Sketch has more or less gone completely into the subscription model. They're still way more affordable than Adobe, but that is their biggest competitor now that Figma got bought by them. So Affinity is like filling a different niche, and like the buck is being passed down continuously in terms of like who can start like using these sorts of things. So I'm really happy that they're doing what they're doing. They're building real apps for iPad and not just like toy
Yeah.
apps. And yeah, I think that's great, especially for the art world, because like the pencil is the best on the iPad, and that's like the best digital drawing device there is nowadays. So really cool.
Yeah. As as a software developer, I know how much it costs to build a X feature, right? It's insane to me. Like if I if I will look at how many hours it takes me to build a feature for my job and multiply it by the amount of you know, basically my hourly rate, it's a lot of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having, I mean, I get the subscription model. I get why Adobe did what they did. It sucks. It's I think a little vindictive and a little bit too much for most people, unless you're doing it professionally. But like you said, the Sketch model and this model, they're a good way to keep the software development going because it is an expensive endeavor, and I'm sure they have, a decently large team, or at the very least they have people that know what they're doing. The stuff that they're doing is not easy, so they're definitely not all junior developers, and so the cost of development, I'm sure, is high. So I definitely will be getting that universal license, especially now that you told me that if I get just the photo, I'd have to buy it for both Mac
Mm-hmm.
and iOS, and then that's over $60, where I'll just get everything for 100 while it's cheap. So
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to support them, and I do still use at least Affinity Photo on occasion, even if it's like to make new lower thirds for code completion or something. Like the amount of time that I use it is pretty low, but I feel like I've got a lot of use out of it, and it's a good way of supporting them. While I'm sure this V2 will last, I'd assume, a fair amount of time before they go on to like the same thing with a V3. It's I don't know, good deal all around, I guess.
Yeah. And Uh, there is one like alternative to the sketch model, which I'm going to call the working copy model because this is the only app that I know that implements it. If you want to do the sketch model on iOS, you have a very different kind of paradigm to work with. You are essentially still having to ship updates to anyone who has bought your app previously. Sketch would basically say like, "Hey, you can't update anymore," and then you'd
Mhm.
be stuck with the old version. Whereas working copy, like as they add new features, that gets shipped out to everyone. So what they did is every time that they add a feature, they basically tag it with when it got added, and that means that as you like as your subscription runs out, because you can do a non-renewable subscription that you can buy multiple times via in-app purchase. So when that one runs out, what they will do is they will essentially gate all new features, but all your old
Mm,
features are continuously going to be maintained, which is a big difference from Sketch's model, where like, hey, new OS, like you've lost access at that point, so you'll need to
yeah.
update. So I think that is probably the sweetest like point for the consumer, though. Like as we discussed, it's not as safe for the company because like the customer may never need those newer features, and therefore you spent a whole bunch of time developing them and they're never gonna come out. Same for Affinity. Like, hey, everyone might not want V2, right? So they spent
Yep.
a ton of time making V2 in advance, using all the profits that they've made to like fund that. And then all of a sudden, hey, maybe no one wants it. So that's like the biggest risk with like doing the multiple versioned releases.
Yeah.
And it's about finding like a sweet point. I don't think subscriptions for most apps is going to make sense, but this limited time thing where you can gently remind people or let them like do an automatic subscription if they want to. I think that's probably going to be the sweetest spot, where you can continuously ship new products. You kind of amortize over a long duration of time, uh, gaining and losing customers. And as long as you can have that steady state that you're looking for, then you can continuously work on your app and make a living off of it. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot, at least for smaller developers.
Hmm.
Keep wanting to have happy customers, right?
Yeah. Did we did we talk about Filmic Pro on the podcast? I know we talked about it like off, but I don't. Did we ever talk about it?
I don't think we did, no.
Okay, so that's like an example of going to the subscription model going like incredibly horribly wrong. Recently, I think it was a couple months ago, Filmic Pro got bought out by a company, and the company decided, hey, we're going to move to the subscription model where Filmic Pro is, if you don't know, it's basically like the video capture app for iOS. Very manual features. It's got logarithmic capture. It's got a bunch of stuff that is sort of more of like the professional thing. Like if you want to shoot a feature film or a documentary on an iPhone, you'll probably use Filmic Pro because it has a lot of manual focus control, manual exposure control, that kind of stuff. It's very powerful, and I think it was $5 at some point, $10 at some point, but it was relatively affordable. And so my assumption is they thought, oh well, if people are making feature films with these, instead of buying a red camera, they'll buy the app once and then that's it, and maybe for 5 iPhones or whatever, and that's $25 made and that's it.
That would be a one-time purchase because they'll have made all those installs via one Apple ID, right? So that's
Even
that's where
worse.
they really got they miscalculated, to say the least.
Yeah. So what they did was they said, oh, we're going to move to a subscription model. I can't remember the price. It was like $5, $8 or something like that, but it was per week. And I think that per week subscription really pissed off a bunch of people. And I think it makes sense for some people. Like if you are only on a shoot for a couple weeks, then you only pay for 2 weeks. But man, they just marketed it so poorly, and I think I haven't really followed it since the initial backlash. But like that whole sphere of mobile filmmakers and mobile videographers on Twitter, where it was just like a dumpster fire on Twitter. It was kind of fun to watch, but because it wasn't happening to my company. But point is, I think what Affinity has done is like it's very tactful in the way that
Hmm.
they've sort of approached, hey, we need more money or we want more money for whatever reason, development costs,
Yeah.
whatever.
Less
Totally cool.
customers, right?
Yeah, I
They've
get
reached a
that.
saturation.
Exactly. But there's also the flip side of that, which is you can do it horribly, terribly wrong, like Filmic, and you basically just, jaded your entire customer base. And they were like, "Oh yeah, let's use I think it's called like Beast Cam or something. It's only $2." And so I mean, it was an immediate 180 of like, yeah, we're just going to use something else if they go to this model for the vast majority of people, or at least the vocal majority of people. So,
You're
if
familiar with
you're
Slopes, right?
no.
So Slopes is a skiing and snowboarding app. And
Okay.
basically, they recognize the fact that people are only going to go skiing or snowboarding once, maybe twice a year. And that's for the average. Maybe it's once every few years. But you
Sure.
still may really like the app and you want the features of it. So what they do is they have a day pass, a season pass,
Well,
and like different. Like they've aligned with the
that's
marketing
cool.
terms that the
Yeah.
ski like industry uses, and the snow sport industries use, to align themselves in a way that's going to work out and get the benefits. Like it might be really expensive paying daily, day after day, for slopes, but then you don't have to do that. You can go for a season pass and save money.
Mm,
That way, it's entirely you already planned your trip. You know what you're going to be doing. So you can go ahead and benefit there. And I think you can unlock it after the fact. Like you can record everything and then unlock. So it's
that's really
it's a
cool.
very open like way of doing this. And I imagine the poor developer probably only gets like a big payday every December or every winter season, and then all of a sudden the rest of the year is like tumbleweeds going through. But that's a big enough like uh surge in income that he's able to have it last out the whole
Yeah.
year. So, or the opposite, I guess it would backfill the year depending on how taxes are being done. But I think there are many ways of like marketing things like this. Like you could have done, hey, you're doing one set, like buy Filming Pro by the set. And then like, hey, you're gonna do a shoot, then you buy it, you do your shoot, and then it deactivates. And then you're about to do another shoot, then you buy it again. Like at that point,
Yeah.
you're expensing it to whoever's doing the shoot, so you don't really
Right.
care as much as the individual contractor working on these sorts of things. So that's how they probably could have done it in a much more tasteful way that at least recognizes what their market is, right? Are
Mm.
you someone who's just doing it on your own and you just want to do like a quick weekend project? Then do it that way. Are you someone who uses this professionally? Then do it another way, right? Address your audience and think about how you're going to be marketing these things.
Yep.
Talking about building apps, I built an app a really long time ago in 2006. And very recently, I was like, well, I may want to consider bringing this app back. And if you're curious, the app is Sluzzles. And this was like a tile based puzzle that I made relatively quickly, just out of wanting to make a quick game and having a quick idea that could make it work. So this is an Objective C project, and I was dreading just like relaunching it on modern devices. I'm like, this is nothing is gonna work, and this is gonna be like weekends of getting the wrench underneath the app and like really trying different things until it gets going. But to my
Yeah.
surprise, I was able to get it working in like under 20 minutes. So if you have an old app and you are scared of the the necessary wackiness that would be needed to get it kind of working again, I have some recent experience in telling you exactly what I went through, so that way maybe it's less of a burden for you. So the first thing that I noticed is when I launched this thing, like Xcode was not happy. But because this was Objective C, like I didn't need to go through multiple versions of Xcodes and potentially VMs to modernize the Swift at every stage. So I'm very happy I did not use Swift for this. I'm not sure if Swift was available in 2006. This was before the iOS 7
Oh,
transition as well. Like I miraculously landed on a quote unquote flat design before flat
uh-huh.
design was in. So
Nice.
that was pure luck on my part. So yeah, the first step is like open an Xcode and just see what it's complaining about. There were some fun things that I found out, like hey, I was making really bad decisions in terms of using calling Objective C message send like directly rather than just using Objective C syntax. And I had a comment saying like something really naive at the time, like uh, just stop it, compiler, in more barbaric language, of course.
Uh-huh.
Stop it, compiler. Like, I know what I'm doing. This warning is useless. Turns out it was a hard error in the future, in the distant future. So I just commented out, and it was like, I can live without this supposed functionality for the time being. So commented it out and moved on to the next issue that popped up. The next issue was I was importing TestFlight, the library, and this was because TestFlight was not owned by Apple yet, and it was an actual library that you would like have as a part of your app, so that
Right.
way you can go ahead and like share it with people in a reasonable way without making ad hoc builds all on your own. So that was number two of things to just like delete. I didn't bother disabling. It was like this can be removed from the project.
Uh-huh.
Yes, Xcode, please do. And then removing it from the targets, and then anywhere I was importing and using that, I just commented out. So that was like step two. Of course, Xcode still was not happy, and Xcode was still not happy because my deployment target was still iOS 6. And modern Xcode, the minimum deployment target is iOS 11, which I was
Oh,
like, oh, sorry, iOS 6 users, you're out of luck. So
right.
I bumped that to iOS 11, and at that point it compiled and it ran and it worked exactly as I left it,
That's amazing.
which was like a testament to Objective C more than anything, because I'm sure with Swift that at that point you would have to go in and modernize stuff. And by modernize, I mean like use the right API translation from
Mm.
UIKit to Swift, because that naming has changed over the years, and it's not hard, but it is like, oh, okay, going here, retyping this in a different way. That's how the syntax has changed significantly, at least from like Swift 3 and 4. If you're from
Oh
Swift
yeah.
1 and 2, the other parts of the language did change significantly, so that would all have to change as well. So really thankful that that was a more or less easy process. Of course, the app still was like in like a window
In the
inside the
box.
iPhone,
Yeah.
because it turns out I had images per iOS device that my app was compatible with,
Mm.
and that's the only like devices it would run on. So I selected all, deleted those, went to File, Add File, and added a launch storyboard, which was like a foreign concept in this app. Um, and I just left it at like the default for now. It was
Mhm.
not as pretty as my hand tailored default images, of course, but YOLO.
That's awesome.
Um, so then
Oh.
I built that, and that seems to work like more or less fine. So I have a reasonably ancient app that's now working on a new device. Of course, there are lots of things that I would want to tweak for this, but like basically the game works entirely. I had fun solving a puzzle for the first time in, I don't know, 6 years.
That's
Wait,
cool.
2007? No, that's no, iOS 7. iOS 7 came out in
Uh,
2012.
12, 11.
So it's like 10 years. Um,
Yeah.
if it is iOS 2012, I was like iOS 7 2007. No, it's not not a correlation that exists. Um, but yeah, so I do want to make more improvements to the app before I like release it. But yeah, it was really fun. It was really fun modernizing an ancient app that I put together relatively quickly. It's relatively small. I would probably want to, as an exercise, go ahead and modernize the Objective C to Swift at this point, because Swift is not changing syntactically anymore.
Hmm.
So there's no more need for those converters for the most part. So it's at a stable enough point where I can go ahead and do that. And I'm reasonably sure the compiler will support my flavor of Swift for the foreseeable future, or at least some open source tool will. Now that it's really becoming widespread, at least the OSs will, because they're hard coded with Swift at this point. So yeah, that's what the experience is like modernizing an old app. So if you have an old app and you have been scared of updating that thing, rest assured that for all intents and purposes, like nothing that I was using in UIKit, nothing that I was using in Core Animation was really broken. Like, yeah, there are deprecations, but all those deprecated things still work. So that is really, really cool. Like, you probably can't see the same thing of like Swift UI at this stage. Like, a lot of things are probably going to break over the next few years, especially over 10 years. But at the very least for UIKit, that was stable. UIKit's probably not going to last another 10 years, given the current messaging. So now is the time to like fix that up and modernize it. But thankfully, if you have well-written code that you can kind of follow, then you can go ahead and update that or you can update it piecemeal, right? You don't have to go all in. So first I'm going to be updating it from Objective-C to Swift. And then a second step will be updating it from UIKit to Swift UI. But I can take my time doing that part.
Nice. That's cool. I don't have projects quite as old where they were entirely written in Objective-C, and I learned Swift first, but I have tried to modernize a couple of my projects. It's been a while since I have, but it always has been met with, this doesn't even compile because it is like Swift 2 or Swift 3, and the language itself has changed a fair amount in comparison. But it is a matter of like using the Xcode's app to download the right version of Xcode it'll tell you like, oh, download Xcode 11 point whatever to go from 3 to 4 or whatever it is. I can't remember. So I think I had to do that 2 times, 2 different versions of Xcode. So I was like, wait a couple hours for it to download and unzip and everything. But other than that, it is like, it'll ask you to update recommended project settings and everything. But for the most part, it is fairly easy. And I didn't ever my projects weren't complex enough to like run into things where it like couldn't automatically convert things over. So that was nice. And it maybe wasn't quite as seamless as the experience that you had going from Objective-C. But if you do have an old project, it's kind of fun to like pull it up again and convert it and then see, oh yeah, this still works for the most part. And definitely it's a time to gasp in fear of what your old code looked like, because you've learned a lot since then, but it still works and you can modernize it and make it maybe a little bit more clean. So
exactly, yeah, like this experience was definitely different than past experiences doing it, because it was working from an iOS 6 like era code base. It was not working from an iOS 6 era code base that had stuff from iOS 3. 3.2, because it was an iOS before that. So like I have other apps that are much older that would probably not work as seamlessly. And those ones are going to require significantly more work to maintain. And that's the reason why I stopped maintaining them, because as iOS 8 was coming out, I was like, well, iOS 8 is breaking a bunch of stuff that I relied on from iOS or iPhone OS 2. And that is like code that is significant enough in my project that I'm going to need to rewrite all of it to use a complete different paradigm that like didn't exist. So although that code has like survived the transition from non-Retina to Retina to like barely peeking into the iOS 7 and iOS 8 era, it was not something I could actively maintain anymore. I would have to like start fresh. And I just didn't. I didn't have the time and I didn't have the motivation to do it. And therefore that project kind of stopped. So that's always going to be a thing that can't happen. I was just tremendously lucky in this scenario. So I didn't think it would be this easy. I was assuming like I would have to rewrite. But I wanted to see like how the app behaved, because if I'm going to be rewriting it, I want to like match a lot of the behaviors. And I remembered I had a lot of pleasant animations and sound effects and interactions that I made possible that I probably wouldn't be able to do in SwiftUI yet. Like these are things that were like highly tuned with deep knowledge of how core animation worked, that just like worked perfectly. Like multi-finger, multi-touch interactions were just something that were pleasant to play with for this little game. And it's not something that I could have completely rewritten. So I was like, or at least I couldn't have completely rewritten from memory alone. So I wanted to see it, and I was pleasantly surprised that hey, that worked. So maybe I don't need to start fresh. I can go from here. I might want to start fresh on the UI of it, like the look and feel of the app itself, because it never worked in landscape. It would have to work on all sorts of different screen sizes now. So that's still like a lot of work that I would need to do. But the core game, that part like still works flawlessly. So I'm really pleased about that. Calling all sports fans. This week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Pennant. Want to keep track of the season, but there's so many teams and not enough time? Check out Pennant. Pennant provides sports standings at a glance. Pennant displays league standings as a simple bar chart where the best teams rise to the top throughout the season. Of course, you can dig in deeper with team stats, game results, and more. Version 10 introduced the all-new customizable My Pennant view, where you can build a wide selection of visualizations for any sport, division, or team. Unlock Pennant Premium to add as many blocks as you'd like and put any of them on your home screen as a widget. Whether you follow MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, or MLS, Pennant has you covered with more sports and leagues coming every day. Thank you so much to Pennant for sponsoring Code Completion. Download Pennant on the iOS App Store today. So Spencer, I've got a new Code Completion tip for you. And that is do blocks. So I assume you've used do blocks before for things like error handling.
I have, yes.
On occasion.
On occasion, I dabble in
useful thing.
in throwable functions. Yes.
So did you know that you can use them without a catch block that corresponds to them?
I did not. I would usually just try optional.
Yeah, that's something that you can do. But do blocks without the catch, they have nothing to do with error handling at that point. But they do have a lot of uses that can potentially help make your code better. So here's a scenario. You have a function and it does the same thing twice, right? So you declare the variable the first time and you say, let my variable equals this, and then you do the thing. And then you need to do it a second time, but that starting variable needs to be something different. So then you're like, let that same variable equals that, but then the compiler complains because you've declared the same variable twice. Has that happened to you?
I don't think so, but I can see I can see the problem.
Okay. So you would be forced to either turn that variable into a var, which may not be what you wanted because it's supposed to be a constant, just used twice. Or you might declare a second variable with a different name, and then like have that confusion going forward. Or you can wrap each time you're doing something in a do block. So you say do, open curlies, do the thing, close the curlies, and any variables defined within that do block are secluded to that do block. So then you can have a second do block that does something else. So that's one great use of this, and I use this all the times in tests. Unit tests are like the quintessential area where you copy and paste code many different times with slight changes to like see, okay, if I have this as an input, if I have this as an input. And do blocks do that perfectly because you don't have to have many different test cases for like one thing that you're testing. But you can like use code folding to like hide away the ones that you're not interested in. So that's a great use. You can reuse variable names like copy pasting. And they're like unique per that situation. So that's another great use for that. They share in their parent context. So if you have anything declared outside, you can use it in all those do blocks as well. So all of those are like great uses for that. My favorite use, which is a bit more complex, is that you can name do blocks. So you can go ahead and use that special syntax for loops where you say like my block : and then do open curly, close curly. And this means that you can break out of a do block early. You can go ahead and break out of there without returning necessarily out of the function, but you can still like stop execution within that block itself. So that's really useful when you are like nesting these with loops and stuff like that. You have a complex algorithm that you're working with, or you just want a basic way of keeping the code a little bit cleaner. You can go ahead and do that. So do blocks. They're very versatile. And even though like most people only use them for do catch, they can be used on their own. And I think that's like where the do while comes from, is it uses a do block and just add a
Oh,
while on top of that. So um, that's where I initially got inspired to try doing silly things with them, and I found out you can do all sorts of fun things with them. So A plus.
that's cool. Uh, that's always a reminder to me. I should like go back and reread the, or not reread, but just like for something like that, just reference the Swift programming language guide, because there's so much about the language that like super easy to forget, or
Mm-hmm.
there's just a lot. And so I didn't know that, but I'm sure it's in the Swift programming language guide. Everything that you just said, and I could have known that, but I didn't. So it's such a good reference for like anyone that's learning, but I will still reference it on occasion, especially for like there's a good diagram of like how designated and convenience initializers will interact depending on kind of the way that you set them up. So it's a good reference. Interesting. And also, I completely forgot that you can name loops and everything like that too. So that was another good reminder that you just slipped in there. Yeah,
Yep.
very nice. I
Um,
like it.
and I'm glad you call that out, because it's oftentimes hard to like remember all these things. And even if you remember just a snippet of it, then you have to go and look it up and
Hmm.
like find that detail. So if you have read over the Swift language guide recently, and you did find a lot of things that you liked, but then potentially forgot about later, or needed to re-reference time and time and time again before you actually memorized it, block syntax. So that is something that you might want to keep an eye out, because I have been working on a secret project,
Oh,
and that secret project is not ready for anything like any kind of announcement yet, but it is along those lines. So I hope to get it pretty good shape soon enough, so that way at the very least we can do something along the lines of test flight or something like that. But yeah, that this should be a fun tool that can help a lot of people remember these sorts of things.
nice. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed. As always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes go live, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buniol. That's DimitriBouniol, and we'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. So, I did learn some things since last week regarding my networking setup, and
Okay.
that's always fun to share. One, I got most of my HomeKit like devices in a happy place. I guess they just needed a few days to kind of settle into their new networking environment. Half of this was like steering them to the right access points. Half of this was just like reconnect, 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 reconnect. Hey, there's a transfer rate that seems reasonable. And that
Oh
kind of brought
man.
all my switches back online. Like the Decora Leviton switches. I don't know if you use those, but there's no information in either their app or the HomeKit app as far as which device they are in terms of like MAC address. So
Oh.
I had like a very well, I was blessed with a house that none of the switches were connected, so I was just like, okay, I'm gonna restart this one and then go to the home app and see which one comes back online. And that's how I would identify which switch was which. So I did that for a good hour, named all the switches, and now anytime I get like a power blip and then like one is like misconnected and like connected only halfway, I don't know. It's like connected, but it's not pingable. It's a really weird kind of state that they get in. But all I need to do is click reconnect, reconnect, reconnect until the transmit rate goes above 6 megabits per second. And then all of a sudden, it's like there in HomeKit and it's happy, which means I don't have to get up and go to the switch anymore. And I am very
Yeah.
happy about that.
Yeah, dude.
So A plus for that experience. I can just sit my lazy butt down and reconnect.
That's what smart switches are for, man.
Yeah. So now I have a smart switch for the smart switch. If you think of it
Yes.
that way. Though I'm like amazed that works. Like just telling the access point to boot the client is enough to get the client to actually reconnect. I was expecting the client would be like, YOLO, I guess I'm not connecting to anything right now. And then it's like
I'm
have
sure
to
some would.
power cycle it.
Yeah. I'm sure some devices would just be like, all right, whatever. It's cool. We're not going to reconnect.
Yeah. Talking about those devices, the Circle View cameras, which were like super sturdy on my airport Wi-Fi's, are like a hot mess on Unifi access points. So
Nice.
I like really mucked around with the exact settings. I have no idea what I landed on. I think I set all the transmit powers to low. And they seem somewhat happier. But they're like, some of them are still like constantly going offline, online, offline, online, offline, online throughout the day. And that's like driving me nuts. So I don't know if that's also related to like power struggles that the neighborhood has been having ever since the recent rainstorms. So who knows what's going on? I wish I had a whole house backup battery, which I do not have, because the switches rely on wall power, and I can't plug them into like APC backup batteries that all my regular computers are connected into. So that's that. Another thing, turns out HomePods and stuff, like most HomeKit devices actually, you know when they mentioned there's a HomeKit hub, and those devices are special. Turns out a HomeKit hub is basically a network switch, and all the devices, they can connect directly to those devices, like via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and advertise them as living, like via that connection, that hardwired connection that they have. So some of my HomePods, they came up under one MAC address via Wi-Fi. And then when I was switching over the Wi-Fi, my Apple TV was still plugged in, and they hopped onto the Apple TV, and they were all plugged into that port on the switch. And I was like, huh, how am I getting like
weird.
4 things plugged into the same port on this switch? And it turns out the Apple TV was acting as a network switch, but for these wireless devices. So when you set up, I later learned that when you set up the home stereo through the HomePods for the Apple TV, those HomePods are no longer connected to your Wi-Fi. They're connected to the Apple TV directly during an ad hoc link, and that gives them better latency, I guess, because then they show up on your network topology as connected to the same port as that Apple TV is, as if it were a dumb unmanaged switch. But they of course have different MAC addresses, so I had to hunt down like those separate MAC addresses using the excellent Discovery app, which is like a Bluetooth, not a Bluetooth, Bonjour, like advertisement discovery application, and just kind of gives you everything. And if you go under the HAP like identifier, that's all your HomeKit accessories. So you can kind of go through one by one and find out MAC addresses, find out IP addresses, and like
That does not sound fun.
figure it out. The Home app, if you tap on HomePods, do give you the MAC address, like as you cycle through, or it might be IP address. One of them, it gives you some useful information. So you can like figure out what these devices are, and then name them on your network, and then realize that they'll reconnect under Wi-Fi and no longer be wired and have a different like MAC address. Anyways, I got that all sorted, so that is good. The only thing that I can't get connected that are technically connected to my network, except one of them because I really messed it up, are my switch bots. So these were these little tiny devices that you can connect to wall power, and you can control via HomeKit to turn them on and off. And one of them is connected to my Wi-Fi network because I can address it via IP address, like, and it loads in a browser and it says like endpoint not found or whatever. But it like it's addressable.
It's there. Yeah.
But it's not showing up in HomeKit at all. The other one, I was like, okay, let me try turning it, like resetting it to factory and then bringing it on. And I cannot add it to HomeKit, and because I cannot complete that process, it's not adding it to my Wi-Fi either. So that one's just like permanently offline now. So I still like have some tweaking to really like understand what's going on there. And that's unfortunate. But yeah, finally got the whole thing set up, garage included. Finally started like bolting these saucers to the ceiling. I did drop one in the process. They are sturdy. There's nothing shaking on the inside. I can tell you that much. As I like was holding it to try to measure, and it slipped out, and then the Ethernet disconnected. It was chaos. But yeah, so like got it mounted in like 2 rooms. Still got 4 to go. And yeah, overall, like really happy with the network performance in general. As we mentioned last time, the Wi-Fi Man thing sucks. But you can download an iPerf 3 app on your like phone, and I now have enough hooked up where I can run iPerf 3 on a 10 gigabit like Mac, connected Mac, and that like actually goes through all the way, and I was getting over gigabit speed, so I am really happy with all of that. Now I just need like better internet. Please come.
That's
any day now.
Well, you are trying to will it into existence pretty hard with the kind of preparation for it, so hopefully it does manifest itself.
Yeah, for aforementioned app idea, I may need a server component, which I may want to be extra lazy about and host at home. So please, static IP, that would be very useful. It would thankfully be a low volume endpoint that I can actually like host out of my house without like killing my own home internet. But I would obviously not recommend this to anyone because if you've ever done anything hosted out of your home before, like anything can go down and then you're on the hook to fix it if you want it to be fixed. Like it's sometimes worth it just to pay someone else to deal with the network and the devices staying online and all that. And all you have to worry about is like keeping your app running on that machine.
And for the most part, throwing something on a server is probably pretty cheap. I don't know what you want to do, but like hosting something on like Heroku is like free, or like the lowest tier for like so it doesn't go to sleep is like $7 a month or something. It's pretty cheap.
But why spend $7 a month when you can spend thousands on network? Anyways,
hey, that's such a developer mindset. I feel you, man.
Take care, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.